welcome to The Writer's Dream. We specialize in authors who will tell you how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. We're on Facebook, and we are also on YouTube. If you want to see over 100 interviews with authors, please visit us on YouTube. If you have a question for us, please address it to our Facebook page. Our guest today is Irvina Lew, and she is a very interesting writer because she has had a dual career. She started out with You Can't Do It All, which is a guidebook for women. And then she moved into a career as a travel writer, and we are all incredibly jealous of Irvina Lew. So welcome. Tell us about You Can't Do It All.
Well, you missed a little part of my career, which was a 30-year teacher. Wow. In Brentwood on Long Island. I was a French, Spanish, and occasionally ESL teacher.
Now I see the link.
And there is a link. And then I was a feminist activist.
Good for you.
And ERA campaigns, things like that. And what happened was I was old. I had a baby my third year in college. I graduated in 3 years. Immediately started teaching. I grew up in Bayshore, started teaching in Bayshore High School. 6 weeks after the first baby was born. 4 years before, I was a senior when the kids who were seniors were freshmen. So I knew them, they knew me. It wasn't the easiest situation. But the point is that when I started teaching, in Brentwood, I was much older than my friends, my colleagues. And because I'd had a baby so young, most of them had their babies at 30 or so. They were 10 years after me. And I noticed they were not suffering as much as overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. I'll give you an instance of one woman who I still know and love, who had twins, and she took their temperature all day long, and she thought she had to iron their baby clothes. Now, we're going back 30 years, but there are still women
This is
like
all very
that.
familiar to me.
It's familiar to a lot of people, and while there's big, big changes that have taken place, the tendency for new mothers to try to do everything, with their children particularly, to the extent that many of them sort of push the dads away. It's not just that the dads weren't participatory at that time. Many of the women wouldn't let oh, my husband doesn't know how to dress the child, you know, it won't match. Well, I started writing You Can't Do It All. A friend of mine suggested the idea. It was a time when we noticed high-powered women, and I actually started interviewing them. And what I found in very short order is that the woman on Wall Street and the business owner in Manhattan and the high-powered attorney did not have the problems that my suburban working mom people had. They had staffs, they had assistants, they had all kinds of things, and they did not have the same kind of guilt. So I started writing a book for teachers, dental assistants, hygienists, you know, women who went to work every day and came home to do it all.
And couldn't hire a staff.
They didn't have a staff. Their moms, some of them had babysitters or brought their kids to babysitters. So a major chapter in this book is about how to hire what childcare works for you, etc. Anyway, that's how I got into writing You Can't Do It All. But getting it published was perhaps a 3 to 5 year process. And to find an agent was enormously difficult. So here I am, wife, mom, teacher, mother, and I'm in the big leagues in New York City. I bought it happened to have been Coach. I didn't even know the word Coach in those days, but it was a little black attaché case, made me feel very businesslike.
Very professional.
Very professional. And I met an agent, and the agent said to me, "Have you ever been published?" And I said no. But I went out of his office, scratched my head, and said, I think I should get published. What do I know? And my husband was an ardent sailor, and we sailed a lot. I was a feminist activist. I started writing viewpoints for Newsday, which occasionally got published. I had the first one framed. Cost more to frame it than they paid me, of course. And then I started writing. I got this great gig at Long Island and New York nightlife. And I didn't criticize, but I featured 5 restaurants a month, 1,000 words, about 5 restaurants a month. And I did that for about 6 years. And as I did that, I did roundups for lobster lovers only. I did Dock and Dine, and then I moved into writing about spas. They had a looking good section. Mm-hmm. Now, all of this is concurrent with trying to get an agent and sell the book.
And teaching as well. You were still teaching.
I was teaching. And I would come home from teaching, and I was trying to date when I started writing. And we sold our home in Islip in 1979, and my husband had a little room off the garage. Each of my 3 children had their own bedroom, and he built me a dividing wall in our bedroom as a headboard. And on the back side of it, he built me a desk. And this became a Cinderella song, my own little corner in my own little world. And I started writing in that space. Since then, I've always had an office, since that house. But that became my precious space and time. So I was concurrently writing travel and trying to get the book sold. Shall I continue?
Well, let me ask you a question about You Can't Do It All. You were having trouble publishing it. Do you think it was the time? Because I think that women in that time period thought they could do it all and felt an inner need to and expected themselves to do it all. And I think that that pendulum is swung a little bit in the other direction.
There's no question. This was before its time, and it also was almost concurrent with Martha Stewart, who at the same time I'm saying, you can't do everything for everybody. Your kids have to be, buy a sleeping bag and throw it on the kid's bed. Let the kid just,
make a nest.
Make a nest. Just don't get involved in every little thing. At the same time, Martha, I knew I was doomed when I was on an airplane and a flight attendant was reading Martha Stewart, who's telling you not only how to grow your garden and bake the bread and decorate your home and everything. And these women were really, obviously, look at her success, very much relating to, I can do everything in the world and then some. So it was a bit early. There's no question. One of my daughters keeps saying, you should have done it again and come out with it again. It was early, but it meant something to me, and it meant something to some of my readers.
Well, also, in listening to you, I get the impression that you had your teaching job, which I'm sure you were very good at because you're a very good communicator, and your personality as a writer was developing, because I can relate to that. I didn't start writing till late in my teaching career. However, everything that happened around me really did influence the kind of writing I came up with, and I can see that in everything that you're saying.
And you say it's like a dichotomy. To me, it's one little circle. Mm-hmm. I started out, before I started teaching French, I was lucky enough, I was smart enough to convince my father that if he sent me to France for a summer to study at the Sorbonne,
good girl,
I could graduate in 3 years and save him money. Now, that summer in Paris changed my life.
Sure.
I just took my granddaughter to Paris for the first, she's 19 now, as I was then. And so to me, that whole thing of studying abroad and teaching French and then writing about it, I did imaginary travel trips with my students. They had to pretend to be in a country that spoke the language. Mm-hmm. So we were travel writing in my classroom before I started travel writing.
And I was writing mysteries in my classroom.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting, and I think that it's so interesting from the personal level of an author. You get asked these questions: where do your ideas come from? Right. How do you write? Where do you write? And it really is. People who write understand that it's a whole total picture and environment that you live in, partially in your head, but somewhat in the physical world, that enables you to come up with a story.
And you need the yin and yang, because writing is so solitary. And there are periods when you can be totally alone. Today's Friday. I have added a crazy thing in my life. I go out for a drink on Friday, which as a teacher we did on payday.
Right.
But sometimes I'm home Monday to Friday usually I go into the city for a day, but sometimes I'm home for 5 days. I don't see people. And after teaching and having, that camaraderie and the 150 students every day, it's different.
It is very different.
Excuse me.
So I want to hear about your travel experiences and your travel books. Can you just tell me a little bit about the French book?
Well, the French book is the same as You Can't Do It All.
Okay.
And what happened was that this finally got published. Macmillan published it. And by the way, I was and am a bit of a snob. I wanted it well published. I wanted an agent.
Good for you. Yeah.
It was a time I had a K-Pro in those years. It was something that people who worked for Newsday had, and I did have an early computer. But self-publishing wasn't as available as it is today.
And it also
was a whole
wasn't
other world.
respected. It wasn't.
No, it was not as respected. So I just kept pushing. There is a quality called stick-to-itiveness, and I just kept going. It finally got published. Here's the joy of that and what changed my life in another way. Not only the title author, which is very nice, but I got an 8-city tour. I was in Macy's one day in Manhattan, and I called, I don't know, I had an answering machine or something. I called home. I had a message from Ziploc. Ziploc hired me, and I became their spokesperson for 3 years. And I wrote this little mom's survival guide for Ziploc.
Yeah.
Which is a silly little thing about how moms can use Ziploc storage bags to make life easier when your kid's a swimmer or whatever. It was fun. Well, I went to 30 cities on radio and television for 3 years. And now here I am, born in Bayshore, teaching in Brentwood. It's a little world. Yes. I didn't have the kind of money to travel a lot. We sailed. We used Ziploc bags. Every bathing suit, every scarf was in a Ziploc. I loved them. But then I took unpaid leave days from school because I could not afford to lose that job. A car service picked me up. It took me to an airport. It took me to a hotel. I had room service.
A bit of a different life.
It was a whole different life from the mom at the table with the dog and the kids, and it was just very different. And that was an entry into the travel world. And I really had a plan to do a whole series of ideas that work. But when I started traveling, I just met such fascinating people, and even the women I met, these high-powered women who would interview me and say, well, I'm not a feminist, I want to get paid equally, and I want to get the best job I can, but I wouldn't be it was just an eye-opening experience to meet people all around this country. And can I just do a quick aside?
Sure.
I was interviewed in St. Louis, Missouri, by a blind woman who had an infant in a playpen next to her. And the infant was about 10 months old. This was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. The infant was gurgling and telling her mother the entire time of this kind of interaction that she was fine. And I don't know why that is one of many, many moments in travel where that particular station was behind a food pantry. It was in a very bad neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of these moments where you saw this communication of a child to a mother. It was just beautiful. So travel enhanced my life in a million ways.
But I also think that you have to be the kind of person who picks up on that. Someone else could sit in the same place and see the gurgling child as an annoyance. You saw it as communication, because that's the theme I see in your life. You taught language.
Right.
Okay,
right.
that's all communication.
Yeah, it is true.
And then you saw a need in your fellow workers, so you wrote this book, and then you translated it into another language, and this brought you.
And that money, I think it was $3,000, $4,000, and it was maybe 1990. But when that was sold, it was like I won the lottery. And I said, this doesn't go to Lilco. This is not paying for food. I am not buying children's sneakers. I am going to France. And that was I spent that money on a 2-week trip I started in Monaco, the south of France, and ended up being interviewed at the Crillon in Paris. It was unbelievable. But that was a big deal for me because it came out of the blue and was very special in my life.
But I think that what I'm trying to get at is that as an author, one of the qualities, because one of the questions I ask at the end of an interview is, what's the best piece of advice you could give to a writer? And people will say things like stick-to-itiveness and whatnot, but really, I think about this a lot, and I do write a blog, and I keep trying to get at that quality that makes an author an author. What is it about? I mean, there are a number of things, but one of them, I think, is a sensitivity to the world around you, what people are saying, what people are doing, keying into what they're feeling, because when you write, you really have to write about that. Even I'm sure in your travel writing, you talk about the people you meet and how they affect you and what you see there.
Well, I think that I do want to talk about that. When you talk about writing, I always say, just do it. I meet young people all the time, and I say, write about anything you know. And I had some good advisors. Barbara Kautz was my agent, and she had very stick-to-itiveness. But when I was writing for magazines in the very beginning, she said, study the magazine, study 3 or 4, and pitch what you know to something you know very well.
Right.
It was great advice.
Right.
And I had another mentor, Gloria Rosenthal. I took a class well before the book was published, and we're still friends. And Gloria would say, send it out, send it to the best magazine, the best newspaper possible. If it gets returned, and this tells you how long ago she was saying this, it was in the early 80s, iron it,